Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and welcome to what used to be Silmarillion Saturdays. We recently, actually just last week, finished up the Silmarillion, and my chair is too high. There we go. We just finished up the Silmarillion last weekend, so that means we need to start a new book today, and I decided that we would be starting the Lays of Beleriand. This is book 3 of the History of Middle-earth, and this is basically Tolkien's poetry. This is poetry. So there are several different pieces that are within this book, but the main two are going to be the Lay of the Children of Húrin, which is the poetry version of the tale of Turin Turambar. So if you followed along in the Silmarillion, that's quite a large story that's within the Quintus Silmarillion. And then the second one that has most of these tags here is the Lay of Leithian, later known as the Lay of Luthien. This is what Aragorn is singing to himself when he is transporting the hobbits from Bree to Rivendell. So in the extended version of The Fellowship of the Ring by Peter Jackson, he goes off on his own for a few minutes, and Frodo wakes up and hears him singing. What he is singing is the Lay of Luthien. So there are a couple versions of each in here. Because this is the History of Middle-earth series, one can expect that there are a lot of notes. Far too many notes for my taste. So the History of Middle-earth series in general, just as a preface, is a lot of background material. It is all of the things that Tolkien wrote, his notes, his drafts, things that his son Christopher Tolkien compiled into volumes, but he gives notes on, because this is in a day and age when Tolkien hand wrote all of this. This is before computers, right? So he hand wrote everything, which means some things are done in pencil, some things are done in pen. He scratches things out or retitles things, and so all those details are in the History of Middle-earth. So books 1 and 2 of the History of Middle-earth are the Books of Lost Tales 1 and 2. That has more detailed information on the evolution of the story of the fall of Gondolin, amongst other things, but I wanted to have some fun with poetry, and so I thought we would skip right ahead to the Lays of Beleriand. This is the one book of the History of Middle-earth that I've actually read multiple times. I don't tend to read things multiple times. I might go back and reference books, but our recent read-through of the Silmarillion was only my second/third read-through of the entire book, cover to cover. So it's kind of significant that I don't tend to read things all the way through. Not more than once. So this is the only book of Tolkien's that I've read multiple times. And you can tell the spine's broken, and yeah, I've obviously put in a bunch of little tabs here to help me keep track of which canto we are on if we get to the Lay of Luthien. So I haven't decided, and maybe you guys can weigh in on this, if you would like me to read the Lay of the Children of Húrin, which is slightly longer format. It has fewer lines, but each line has more words in it, if that makes sense. So if I remember correctly, the Lay of the Children of Húrin, each line is, I think it's 10 or 12. I think it's 10 syllables per line, and each line has alliteration. So you have every single line of the poem being 10 syllables, but with a common sound being repeated. So consonants, assonants, all of these devices to make things interesting. So as an example, here is one line. This is a line in the 700s. This is from the magic mazes of Melian the Queen. magic mazes of Melian. So you can hear the consonants, right? The repeating consonant sound, in that case, a nasal sound. So Tolkien experimented a little bit with the Lay of the Children of Húrin. So it's a specific number of syllables, and it has that alliteration going on. And then, so that's choice number 1, or choice number 2 would be reading the Lay of Leithian, which is the story of Beren and Luthien, but in poetic form. And in this case, he did... It's couplets. So, I'm trying to remember my literary terms, because I haven't read poetry in a really long time. So, the Lay of Leithian is done in rhyming couplets. It's 8 syllables per line, and then every 2 lines rhymes. So it's A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D for rhyming structure. So, those are our choices. The Lay of Luthien is much longer. Tolkien obviously spent a lot of time on it. If I'm looking ahead here... Where is it? Okay. The Lay of Leithian has 4,223 lines, so it's much longer. We obviously wouldn't read all of that today. That's like half the book, but... Oh, nice! Thank you so much! Thanks, Lore Nerd. I appreciate that. Yeah, if anybody on TikTok wants to tippity-tap the screen, you can do that for a few seconds until it fills up the bar at the top, and that helps me get a little bit closer to people on the FYP. So if you see this, please do that for me. Or head over to my YouTube channel, where I need the minutes watched anyway. So those are the choices. I'm not sure if anyone has a preference, if I should just start at the very beginning, which would be the Children of Húrin. Or if you guys would like me to skip to the Beren and Luthien bit, because I know people really like those two. Luthien's a badass, I don't blame you. Anyone got a preference, or shall I just start at the beginning? I think we can start with the Children of Húrin. The thing about the Lay of the Children of Húrin is it was never completed. So it's one of those things, like, there's no payoff at the end, unfortunately, but that's the case with the History of Middle-earth series in general. In general, Tolkien started these things and never finished them. So, at the very end it says, here both A and B, as in versions of the lay, here both A and B end abruptly, and I think it is certain that no more of the poem was ever written. So... So we can start on the Lay of the Children of Húrin, and see how far we get. Because there's quite a lot here, and I know that we won't get through the entire lay in one go. I could try, but it's a lot of pages. So let's do that. Let's start at the beginning. Yeah, we'll do that. Thanks, Carrie. I'll say you're the only one who answered, so you win. Okay. So, once again, Lays of Beleriand. There are no illustrations in this book, unfortunately. So, let me get to the start here. So I'm going to skip all of the commentary and all of the footnotes and stuff like that. So we're just going to get the poetry alone. And then from there we can try to connect it back. So there are a couple different versions of the Lay of the Children of Húrin, just as a reminder in the Silmarillion of what is going on. This is the time and place where Huor and Húrin have both gotten in trouble with the Dark Lord, Morgoth. Another thing to... well, they've gotten in trouble with Morgoth, and Morgoth chains one of them to a chair atop a mountain, gives him preternatural sight, and basically says, "You're going to sit here and watch as I ruin everything for you." Classic Morgoth, right? So this is the tale of Húrin's child, Túrin Turambar. There's a whole chapter on him in the Silmarillion. It is a very sad story. It was a sad day. Like every day for Túrin, though a lot of his drama is self-imposed. If that it's self-made drama, but we can forgive him. And I have one bit of hair that's just sticking up out of nowhere. What is happening? Okay. So that's the basic of what's going down. This is Túrin's story. You will notice one thing that's also worth noting is because these are drafts, a lot of the names are different. So Glaurung, the dragon, is Glorund in this version. This is going to be even more pronounced when we hit the Lay of Lathian, because, like, Tinwilint is Thingol, so, like, everything's different. Except for literally the names Beren and Luthien. Those are, like, the only two things that are the same. But shall we get started? Shall we get started? Let's start. Each section here has a title, so I'll say that and then I will get started. It might take me a little while to get into the rhythm of things. It's been a while since I've read poetry aloud, so forgive me. Okay, so the Lays of Beleriand, the Lay of the Children of Húrin, Section 1, Túrin, son of Húrin, and Glorund the Dragon. Lo, the golden dragon of the god of hell, the gloom of the woods, of the world now gone, the woes of men and weeping of elves, fading faintly down forest pathways, is now to tell. And the name most tearful of Niniel the sorrowful, and the name most sad of Thalion's son Túrin, overthrown by fate. So one note there, Thalion is Húrin. So Húrin's son Túrin, but Thalion is what he's called here. Lo, Húrin Thalion, in the hosts of war was whelmed, what time the white-clad armies of Elfinus were all to ruin by the dread hate driven of Delu Morgoth. That field is yet by the folk named Ninin Unothadrin. Oh my gosh. Haven't read that in a long time. Ninin Unothradin. Unnumbered tears. There the children of men, chieftain and warrior, fled and fought not, but the folk of the elves they betrayed with treason, save that true man only, Thalion Erethamond, and his thanes like gods. There, in host on host, the hill-fiend orcs overbore him at last, in that battle terrible. By the bidding of Bauglir, bound him living, and pulled down the proudest of princes of men. To Bauglir's halls in the hills builded. To the hells of iron and the hidden caverns they hailed the hero of Hithlum's land, Thalion oh my gosh. Thalion Erethamron. Oh my gosh. Why? Why, Tolkien? Why you gotta do this to me with the Elvish? Erethamrod. They hailed the hero of Hithlum's land, Thalion Erethamrod, to their throned lord, whose breast was burnt with a bitter hatred, and wroth he was that the rack of war had not taken Turgon 10 times a king, even Finweg's heir, nor Feanor's children, makers of the magic and immortal gems. For Turgon, towering in terrible anger, a pathway clove him with his pale sword blade out of that slaughter. Yea, his swath was plain through the hosts of hell, like hay that lieth all low on the lay, where the long scythe goes. Yikes. So hopefully you guys are picking up a little bit of the alliteration. I'm trying to basically, like you do with poetry, ignore the breaks in the lines and sink into a deeper cadence. It's not the easiest for me. I'm trying though. A countless company that king did lead through the darkened dales and drear mountains out of ken of his foes. And he comes not more in the tale, but the triumph he turned to doubt of Morgoth the evil, whom mad wrath took. Nor spies sped him, nor spirits of evil, nor his wealth of wisdom to win him tidings, whither the nation of the gnomes was gone. Now a thought of malice then Thalion stood, bound unbending in his black dungeon, then moved in his mind that remembered well how men were accounted all mightless and frail by the elves and their kindred. How only treason could master the magic whose mazes wrapped the children of Corthun, and cheated his purpose. I'm loving this, it's just been a while. One thing of note, the gnomes are the elves. In early drafts of Tolkien's world, the elves were called gnomes. So whenever you hear something about gnomes or gnomish, they are talking about the elves. Or rather, he is talking about the elves. Oh, I didn't think there were actually going to be quotes. I get to use my filters. Yay! Okay, we're going to have a little bit of voice effects going on. Of course, this is something that I should have read ahead, because with poetry, you can't always tell immediately who is speaking. I'll try, though. I shall try.
Is it dauntless Hurin?
Quoth Delu Morgoth.
Stout, steel-handed, who stands before me a captive living as a coward might be. Knowest thou my name, or needst be told? What hope he has who is hailed to Angband, the bale most bitter the Balrog's torment. I know and I hate. For that knowledge I fought thee by fear unfettered, nor fear I now.
Said Thalion there, and a thane of Morgoth on the mouth smote him, but Morgoth smiled.
Fear when thou feelest, and the flames lick thee, and the whips of the Balrogs thy white flesh brand. Yet away canst win, and thou wishest still to lessen thy lot of lingering woe. Go question the captives of the accursed people I have taken, and tell me where Turgon is hid. How with fire and death I may find him soon, where he lurketh lost in lands forgot. Thou must feign thee a friend faithful in anguish, and their inmost hearts thus open and search. Then, if thou tellest, thy triple bonds I will bid men unbind, that abroad thou fare in my service to search the secret places, following the footsteps of these foes of the gods.
I'm pausing here because I can't figure out who is speaking. So give me a moment. Okay, we're gonna have to trust. We're gonna have to trust that I switch the voices at the right moment. I hope this ends up not being super confusing. The deeper voice is Morgoth, if that helps. The one who just spoke was also Morgoth. So he's basically telling Húrin, so if you do my bidding, right? If you do my bidding and you go amongst all my thralls, and pretend to be, you know, like in spirit and that you're captive and, you know, wiggle your way into their council, right? If you go and you do that and you get the information that I want, which is the location of Turgon, aka where Gondolin is. If you do that, I will unbind you and let you go free, quote unquote. I will let you go free, but you'll be under my mind control, if you will. That's basically what Morgoth is saying. So you do my bidding here, I will let you go free instead of chaining you here. I will let you go free and you'll be one of my secret agent men, which were actually really common. Morgoth did this a lot. He just didn't happen to get spies that were as highly ranked as Húrin. So if Morgoth succeeds here, this is kind of a big deal. Kind of a big deal if he gets Húrin on his side. But we all know that ain't gonna happen, right? So from here, this is Húrin speaking.
Build not thy hopes so high, O Bauglir. I am no tool for thy evil treasons. Torment were sweeter than a traitor's stain. If torment be sweet, treasure is liever. Or is liver? The hoards of 100 ages, the gems and jewels of the jealous gods, are mine, and a meed shall I meet thee thence. Yea, wealth to glut, the worm of greed. Canst not learn of thy lore when thou look'st on a foe, O Bauglir unblessed? Bray no longer of the things thou hast thieved from the three kindreds. In hate I hold thee, and thy hests in scorn. Boldly thou bravest me. Be thy boast rewarded.
In mirth, quoted Morgoth.
To me now the deeds, and thy aid I ask not, but anger thee not if little they like thee. Yea, look thereon helpless to hinder, or thy hand to raise.
Then Thalion was thrust to Thangorodrim, that mountain that meets the misty skies on high o'er the hills that Heathlum sees blackly brooding on the borders of the north. To a stool of stone on its steepest peak they bound him in bonds, an unbreakable chain, and the Lord of Woe there laughing stood, then cursed him forever, and his kin and seed with a doom of dread, of death and horror. There the mighty man unmoved sat, but unveiled was his vision, that he viewed afar all earthly things with eyes enchanted that fell on his folk, a fiend's torment. And that's the end of the intro. That is the end of the intro. So apologies for stumbling heavily over the Elvish for a moment there. I feel like once I get into the voices of the characters, I tend to sink into the rhythm a little bit better. So this is where Húrin has now been chained to the top of Thangorodrim, but given preternatural sight in order to see all of the evil deeds that Morgoth has planned. for him and his kin. Morgoth has cursed them all, as he is wont to do. Excuse me. Of course, as soon as I start speaking, all the phlegm comes up, right? How's everyone liking the format? How are you guys liking the format? Is this book a series? It sounds awesome. You definitely want to get it. This is book 3 of the History of Middle-earth. Now, this is a very old version, but you can see the number 3 here. So this is specifically the Lays of Beleriand. This is a standalone, kind of. It's part of a series, but the series is the History of Middle-earth, and these are all of the drafts and notes and all the little tiny details that Christopher Tolkien was able to compile from his father's notes and stuff. Because I cannot even imagine the sea of parchment that was Tolkien's office, right? Like, I can't even imagine. So he took all of those notes and tried to compile them in a way that made sense. So in this particular case, book 3 of the History of Middle-earth is all poetry. It's Tolkien's poetry. But this is the only volume of the 12-volume History of Middle-earth series that is poetry. So I thought it'd be something different, you know? It's something a little different. It's still J.R.R. Tolkien. It's still, you know, the brilliant mind that brought us the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. But this is, you know, to me, this is a different side of Tolkien. We get to see something a little bit different. And while the older writing style is easy to stumble over, especially in the actual Silmarillion. If you read the Silmarillion, or if you go to my previous videos where I read and review it, the Ainulindale and the Valaquenta are the first 2 sections of the Silmarillion before you get into the Quenta Silmarillion proper. Those 2 stories are written in a much older style, and it's easy to stumble over it. All the these and thines and thous, right? And the ests. Knowest thou. So it's a little bit easier to stumble over, I feel, when you're in a narrative format, versus in this format, it flows a little bit better because poetry plays to the cadence. You know, rhythm is super important with poetry. And so because of that, once you sink into the rhythm when you're reading, especially when you're reading aloud, because poetry is meant to be spoken, when you're reading aloud, you sink into the rhythm a little bit, and those differences in writing style mellow out a little bit. Said Lord of the Rings wasn't enough of a musical, better write 2 full musicals. I mean, you're not wrong. You're totally not wrong. But please keep in mind, like I said at the beginning here, the Lay of the Children of Húrin was never completed. So while we're going to get super invested in this, there are 2,276 lines, which is nothing compared to the Lay of Lathium, which is over 4,000. It's over 4,000! It's not super long. I mean, we get a lot. You can see how densely packed these words are on each line. So that one is very different to comparatively the Lay of Lathian. And I'm not getting a super close up, but you can tell that there are fewer words on each line for the Lay of Lathian, because that's only 8 syllables per line versus the Children of Húrin is 10 syllables per line. What are you meowing for? What? Gray? My cat. What? Are you coming over? Are you gonna come up? We might have a cat moment here. Gray? Here. Come up. It's okay. Great. Yeah. Yeah, hi. There he is. He's like, no. Nope. When do cats ever listen? But that was a brief look at my cat, Gray. He's being noisy, but disobedient. Huh. He's behind me now, you can't see him. Good afternoon, lane person. Good afternoon. We are just getting started with the Lay of the Children of Húrin in Book 3 of the History of Middle-earth, Lays of Beleriand. So let's continue, shall we? But to sum up what I was saying before, I think that the format of poetry lends itself to that older writing style. So it doesn't feel as out of place, perhaps. And it's easier to read because once you sink into the rhythm, some of the idiosyncrasies of the older English makes sense. You know, adding an extra syllable. Like, for example, the line that I just read, "There the mighty man unmoved sat." Unmoved rather than unmoved, right? There the mighty man unmoved sat. 9 syllables? Weird. I would love if there was a recording of Tolkien reading this. It'd be super cool. Stubborn boy. My cat's just gonna make noise. I apologize in advance. But shall we move on? Let's move on to the next bit. And I'm gonna look ahead really quickly. Okay, there will be a little bit of voice effects going on here. I may give up on the voice effects. They're difficult to manage. That and just there are a lot of characters that we're going to go through a bit more quickly in this version. But we'll see. I'll try. I'll try to keep up. Okay. 1. Turin's fostering. Lo, the Lady Morwen in the land of shadows waited in the woodland for her well-beloved. But he came never from the combat home. No tidings told her whether taken or dead, or lost in flight he lingered yet. Laid waste his lands and his lieges slain, and men unmindful of his mighty lordship dwelt in Dor Loman, and dealt unkindly with his widowed wife. And she went with child, who a son must succour, now sadly orphaned, Turin Thaliodrin, of tender years. Then in days of blackness was her daughter born, and was named Nienor, a name of tears that in language of Eld is lamentation. Then her thoughts turned to Thingol of Elf King, and the dancer of Doriath, his daughter Tinuviel, whom the boldest of the brave Baron Ermabwed had won to wife. So referencing Baron and Luthien there. He once had known firmest friendship to his fellow in arms, Thalion Erethamrod. So thought she now, and said to her son,
My sweetest child, our friends are few, and thy father comes not. Thou must fare afar to the folk of the wood, where Thingol is throned in the 1,000 caves. If he remember Morwen and thy mighty sire, he will fain foster thee, and feat of arms will he teach thee, the trade of targe and sword. And Thalion's son no thrall shall be, but remember thy mother when thy manhood nears.
Heavy boded the heart of Hurin's son, yet he weened her words were wild with grief, and he denied her not, for no need, him seemed. Lo, henchmen had Morwen, Halog and Gumlin, who were young of yore ere the youth of Thalion, who alone of the lieges of that lord of men, steadfast in service, stayed beside her. Now she bade them brave the black mountains and the woods whose ways wander to evil. Though Turin be tender and to travail unused, they must gird themselves and go. But glad they were not, and Morwen mourned when men saw not. She cried when no one was looking. Came a summer day, and sun filtered warm through the woodland's waving branches. Then Morwen stood her mourning, hiding by the gate of her garth in a glade of the woods. At the breast she mothered her babe unweaned, and the doorpost held lest she droop for anguish. There Gumlin guided her gallant boy, and a heavy burden was borne by Halog. But the heart of Turin was heavy as stone, uncomprehending its coming anguish. He sought for comfort with courage, saying,
Quickly will I come from the courts of Thingol. Long ere manhood I will lead to Morwen great tale of treasure and true comrades.
For he wist not the weird woven by Bauglier, nor the sundering sorrow that swept between. The farewells are taken, their footsteps are turned to the dark forest. The dwelling fadeth in the tangled trees. Then Turin leapt, his awakened heart, and he wept blindly, calling,
I cannot leave thee, O Morwen, my mother, why makest me go? Hateful are the hills where hope is lost. O Morwen, my mother, I am meshed in tears. Grim are the hills, and my home is gone.
And there came his cries, calling faintly down the dark alleys of the dreary trees. And one who wept weary on the threshold heard how the hills said,
My home is gone.
The ways were weary and woven with deceit, o'er the hills of Heathlum to the hidden kingdom deep in the darkness of Doriath's forest. And never ere now, for need or wonder, had children of men chosen that pathway, and few of the folk have followed it since. There Turin and the twain knew torment of thirst, and hunger and fear and hideous nights, for wolf riders and wandering orcs and the things of Morgoth thronged the woodland. Magics were about them, that they missed their ways and strayed steerless, and the stars were hid. Thus they passed the mountains, but the mazes of Doriath wildered and wayworn, in one hope bound them. They had nor bread nor water, and bled of strength their death they deemed it to die for wandered. When they heard a horn that hooted afar and baying dogs, it was Beleg the hunter, who farthest fared of his folk abroad, a hunting by hill and hollow valley, who cared not for concourse and commerce of men. He was great of growth and goodly limbed, but lithe of girth, and lightly on the ground his footsteps fell as he fared towards them, all garbed in grey and green and brown, a son of the wilderness, who witst no sire. Love that description of Beleg. Beleg is such a cool character. Get used to Beleg. Honestly, Beleg, Cuthalion, and and Turin Turambar are one of my 3, like, top queer pairings in Tolkien's world. So, if you're queer like me, you will enjoy the interaction between Beleg and Turin. Because Tolkien, perhaps this is the time in which he wrote, but Tolkien is never afraid of saying outright that a male character loves another male character. Yeah, rainbows. and that finger painting emoji. Oh, thank you so much for popping in. Thank you so much, Susie in Scotland. I appreciate you. And the rose and stuff. Thank you. A wishing bottle. That's one I haven't seen before. Super cute. Thank you. But yeah, so if you're queer like I am and you enjoy reading between the lines with certain characters, Beleg and Turin will be one of those. Now, keep in mind, Turin is still super young. He is very young at the moment. And Beleg is full grown. He's been around for thousands of years. You're at the beach? That sounds nice. I haven't been to the beach in ages. I'm photosensitive. Like, not only am I white AF, so I burn like crazy, I do not have the genetics that make for a good sunbather, okay? But in addition to that, I'm actually light sensitive. Too harsh of light, sometimes even my ring light, will cause me to get migraines. So, the beach would not be the best for me. Not a good fit. Yeah, I'm recording at the moment. It's Silmarillion Saturday, aka Lays of Beleriand Saturday. We've started a new book, so we are reading poetry. So we just had Beleg Cuthalion described to us. Okay. I'll attempt to do voices here. Okay, so the last line was, "A son of the wilderness who wits no sire."
Who are ye?
He asked.
Outlaws, or maybe hard-hunted men whom hate pursueth?
Okay, the next speaker is Halog, so I'll just speak him normally. "Nay, for famine and thirst we faint," saith Halog, "wayworn and wildered, and wot not the road. Or hast not heard of the hills of slain, or the tear-drenched field where the terror and fire of Morgoth devoured both men and elves? There Thalion Erethamrod, and his thanes like gods vanished from the earth, and his valiant lady weeps, yet widowed as she waits in Heathlam. Thou lookest on the last of the lieges of Morwen and Thalion's son Turin, who to Thingol's court are wending by the word of the wife of Húrin." Then Beleg bade them be blithe, and said,
"The gods have guided you to good keeping. I have heard of the house of Húrin the Steadfast, and who hath not heard of the hills of slain, of Ninin Unothradin, the unnumbered tears. To that war I went not, but wage a feud with the orcs unending, who mine arrows bitter oft stab unseen and strike to death. I am the huntsman Beleg of the hidden people."
Then he bade them drink, and he drew from his belt a flask of leather full filled with wine that is bruised from the berries of the burning south, and the gnome folk know it, and the nation of the elves, and by long ways lead it to the lands of the north. There baked flesh and bread from his wallet. They had to their heart's joy. He's feeding them, sorry. But their heads were mazed by the wine of Dor Loman that went in their veins, and they soundly slept on the soft needles of the tall pine trees that towered above. Later, they wakened and were led by ways devious, winding, through the dark wood realm by slade and slope and swampy thicket, through lonely days and long night times, and but for Bele had been baffled utterly by the magic mazes of Melian the Queen. To the shadowy shores he showed the way where stilly that stream strikes for the gates of the cavernous court of the king of Doriath. Can we just appreciate the alliteration? Oh my goodness. Stilly that stream strikes for the gates of the cavernous court of the king of Doriath. I love it. O'er the guarded bridge he gained a passage, and thrice they thanked him, and thought in their hearts, the gods are good. Had they guessed, maybe, what the future enfolded, they had feared to live. Ba-ba-ba-bum. Okay, just looking ahead a little bit. Alright, my goal is going to be to get to the end of part 1, which is still several pages. Oh, thank you. Yes, I do study Elvish. That's totally my thing. That is literally my thing here on TikTok. I do a lot of Elvish content, so thank you so much, Susie. But yes, primarily I study Elvish and do that. I do that thing. So, but even I'm stumbling over these ones because these are the earlier versions of some of the names. So, like, what was it? What's the one I keep stumbling over? It was on the previous page, I think. Ninan Unothradin is giving me a little bit of trouble. And then some of, like, the surnames. Like Baron Ermabwen. Ermabwen. Or Erethamrod. Erethamrod is the one that's really troubling me. Every time I say it, I'm gonna make a grimace. Because... Erethamrod? Erethamrod? Shoot. It's not an easy one to say. I'm trying, though. No, I think doing audiobooks would actually be really enjoyable, but I need insulation. There is a lot of echo in my space, because I know you can see that there's sort of like this rug over here. But my place has concrete floors, and I don't have a lot of stuff on the walls, so it echoes like crazy in here. So I need to get a lot of those sound panels and stuff, because otherwise there would be so much reverb, unintended reverb in my readings. It's okay for live streams, but if I were actually doing audiobooks, I would definitely need a proper booth. Tolkien writes good tongue twisters. He does. He does indeed. Especially in this one. Because the Lay of Lathian, because it's just in rhyming couplets, there isn't all of this alliteration going on. And consonants. There's a lot of consonants here, where a consonant sound is repeated in a line. Alright, thanks guys. Thanks. Let's continue, or else we're never going to make it through. To the throne of Thingol the three were come, and their speech sped them, for he spake them fair, and held in honor Hurin the Steadfast, Beren Ermabwen's brother-in-arms. Remembering Morwen of mortals fairest, he turned not Turin in contempt away. Said,
O son of Hurin, here shalt sojourn in my cavernous court for thy kindred's sake. Nor as slave or servant, but a second king's son, thou shalt dwell in dear love, till thou deem'st it time to remember thy mother Morwen's loneliness. Thou wisdom shalt win, unwist of men, and weapons shalt wield as the warrior elves, and Thalion's son no thrall shall be.
bit of a repeating theme there. No thrall shall be. It's the same thing his mother said. There tarried the twain that had tended the child, till their limbs were lightened, and they longed to fare through dread and danger to their dear lady. But Gumlin was gone in greater years than Halog, and hoped not to home again. He's older and he doesn't want to go home. It's too hard of a journey. Then sickness took him, and he stayed by Turin while Halog hardened his heart to go. An elfin escort to his aid was given, and the magics of Melian, and the mead of gold. And in his mouth a message to Morwen was set, words of the king's will, how her wish was granted, how Thingol called her to the 1,000 caves to fare unfearing with his folk again, there to sojourn in solace, till her son be grown. For Hurin the hero was held in mind, and no might had Morgoth where Melian dwelt. Of the errand of the elves and that other Halog the tale tells not. Of the errand of the elves and that other Halog the tale tells not. Save in time they came to the threshold of Morwen, and Thingol's message was said there she sate in her solitary hall. But she dared not do as was dearly bidden, for Nienor, her nestling, was not yet weaned. More, the pride of her people, princes of men, had suffered her send her son to Thingol when despair sped her. But to spend her days as almsguest of others, even elfin kings, it liked her little. And there lived even now a hope in her heart that Hurin would come, and the dwelling was dear where she dwelt of old. So she doesn't want to leave. She's still hoping that her husband Hurin will come back. At night she would listen for a knock at the doors, or a footstep falling that she fondly knew, so she fared not forth, and her fate was woven. Yet the thanes of Thingol she thanked nobly, and her shame she showed not, how shorn of glory to reward their wending, she had wealth too scant. To repay them, she doesn't have the wealth to repay them. But gave them in gift her golden things that last lingered, and they led away a helm of Hurin that was hewn in war when he battled with Beren, his brother-in-arms, against ogres and orcs and evil foemen. 'Twas o'erwritten with runes by rites of old. She bade Thingol receive it and think of her. So this is the Helm of Dor Loman. This is actually a big part of not a big part of the story, but it's a defining feature. It's a defining feature of Hurin in battle, and later his son, Turin. Later on, I'm not sure if it'll reference this, but probably it will. Turin is known as the Helm, and Beleg is known as the Bow, because his surname is Cuthalion, Strongbow. So together they are the Helm and Bow. They have a ship name. And it's canonical. The Helm and Bow. They are known far and wide as the Helm and Bow. I keep freezing. Oh dear. Sorry about that. It looks normal on my end, so it's really hard to tell when that's happening. Please let me know in chat if it happens again, and I will restart the TikTok stream, okay? Let me know. Let me know if it happens again. If it badly freezes. Because obviously it's still sending me messages. Okay, where was I? Okay. Thus Halog her henchman came home, but the elves, the thanes of Thingol, thrust through the woods, and the message of Morwen in a month's journey. So quick their coming, to the king was said. Then was Melian moved to ruth, and courteously received the king her gift, who deeply delved had dungeons filled with elfin armories of ancient gear, and he handled the helm, but he handled the helm as his hoard were scant, and said,
High were the head that upheld this thing, with that token crowned of the towering dragon that Thalion Erthamrod, thrice renowned, oft bore into battle with baleful foes.
Then a thought was thrust into Thingol's heart, and Turin he called, and told when come that Morwen his mother a mighty thing had sent to her son, his sire's heirloom, a helm that hammers had hearkened of old, whose makers had mingled a magic therein, that its worth was a wonder, and its wearer safe, guarded from glaive or gleaming axe.
Lo, Hurin's helm, hoard thou till manhood bids thee battle, then bravely don it.
And Turin touched it, but took it not, too weak to wield that weight as yet. And his mind mourned for Morwen's answer, and the first of his sorrows o'erfilled his soul. Thus it came to pass in the court of Thingol that Turin tarried for 12 long years with Gumlin his guardian, who guided him thither when but 7 summers their sorrows had laid on the son of Thalion. For the 7 first his lot was lightened, since he learnt at whiles from faring folk what befell in Heathlum, and tidings were told by trusty elves how Morwen his mother was more at ease. And they named Nienor, that now was growing to the sweet beauty of a slender maiden. Sorry, I'm just thrown off a little bit by her being a sweet beauty of a slender maiden at the age of freaking 7 or 8. One is not a slender maiden at the age of 8. You weird, Tolkien. I know the times were different, but damn. People marrying their cousins at age 13 and shit. Oh, dear. So, okay, sure, the sweet beauty of a slender maiden. She's really young still. I feel the need to point that out. There he waxed wonderly, and won him praise in all lands where Thingol was lord, and held for the strength of his body and stoutness of heart. Much lore he learned, and loved wisdom, but fortune followed him in few desires. Oft wrong and awry what he wrought turned. What he wrought turned. What he loved he lost. What he longed for he won not, and full friendship he found not easily, nor was lightly loved, for his looks were sad. His looks were sad. He was gloom-hearted, and glad seldom, for the sundering sorrow that seared his youth. People don't like him because he's a downer. You're such a downer, man. God. Gods, rather. By the Valar, would you lighten up, Turin? He's just calling her scrawny. I know, some, like, mad barbs here. Thanks, Tolkien. Yeah, it'd be really funny if that was sarcastic. And they named Nienor that now was growing to the sweet beauty of a slender maiden. It's him just throwing shade at mortal men. L. And he follows that with, like, insults to Turin. He was an emo kid. I doubt it not. I doubt it not. So, he doesn't make friends easily because he's very sad to be around. He's a downer. Debbie Downer. Turin the Tearful. That's from me. That's not actually written here. On manhood's threshold he was mighty holden in the wielding of weapons, and in weaving song he had a minstrel's mastery, but mirth was not in it, for he mourned the misery of the men of Heathlum, yet greater his grief grew thereafter, when from Heathlum's hills he heard no more, and no traveller told him tiding of Morwen. For those days were drawing to the doom of the gnomes, and the power of the prince of the people of Hell, of the grim Glamhoth, was grown apace, till the lands of the north were loud with their noise, and they fell on the folk with flame and ruin who bent not to Bauglir, or the borders past of dark Dor Loman with its dreary pines that Heathlum unhappy is hight by men. There Morgoth shut them, and the shadowy mountains fenced them from Faerie. Faerie meaning elf dwellings, elven home. Sorry, there are a few terms here that won't sound familiar. Glamhoth is a hostile group of orcs. That is a Glamhoth. That's an elvish term. Bauglir is the name that was given to Sauron. Bauglir is another name that basically means dark foe. Like all of them. But Bauglir is, it is another canonical name that's given in the Silmarillion, so this is just an earlier name that they called Sauron. Bauglir is Sindarin, to my knowledge, versus Sauron is actually Quenya. See me geek out about the languages. So here, Faerie is any elven realm for the time. Bauglir is Sauron, and Glamhoth is a group of orcs. It's a group of foes. It is a horde of foes, if you will. Okay. There Morgoth shut them, and the shadowy mountains fenced them from Faerie, and the folk of the wood. Then Beleg fared not so far abroad as once was his wont, and the woods were filled with armies of Angband and evil deeds, while murder walked on the marches of Doriath. Only mighty magic of Melian the Queen yet held their havoc from the hidden people. To assuage his sorrow, and to sate the rage and hate of his heart for the hurts of his folk, then Hurin's son took the helm of his sire and weapons weighty for the wielding of men, and went to the woods with warlike elves, and far in the fight his feet led him, into black battle yet a boy in years. Ere manhood's measure he met, and slew the orcs of Angband, and evil things that roamed and ravened on the realm's borders. Probably ravened. There hard his life, and hurts he got him, the wounds of shaft and war-fain sword, and his prowess was proven and his praise renowned. And beyond his years he was yielded honor, for by him was holden the hand of ruin from Thingol's folk, and Thu feared him, Thu who was throned as Thane most mighty neath Morgoth Bauglir. Oh, my bad. I made a mistake. I have to take back what I just said. Bauglir is Morgoth. I don't know why I was mixing them up. Bauglir is Morgoth. Thu is Sauron. So, sorry. My brain mixes up the Dark Lords sometimes. Bauglir is Morgoth. Thu is Sauron. So they're saying Thu, who is throned as Thane most mighty neath Morgoth Bauglir. Okay? Whom that mighty one bade go ravage the realm of the robber Thingol and mar the magic of Melian the queen. I should have said that in character.
Go ravage the realm of the robber Thingol and mar the magic of Melian the queen.
There we go. Better. Only one was there in war greater, higher in honor in the hearts of the elves, than Turin, son of Hurin, untamed in war. Even the huntsman Beleg of the hidden people, the son of the wilderness who wits no sire. It's a repeated line. To bend whose bow of the black yew tree had none the might, unmatched in knowledge of the wood's secrets and the weary hills. He was leader beloved of the light-armed bands, the scouts that scoured, scorning danger afar over the fells, their foemen's lairs. And tales and tidings timely won them of camps and councils, of comings and goings, all the movements of the might of Morgoth the Terrible. Thus Turin, who trusted to targe and sword, who was fain in fighting with foes well seen, and the banded troops of his brave comrades were snared seldom and smote unlooked for. And there's a pause there, so I'll pause for a second, get some water. Blah. All the tongue twisters. Yay, child soldiers. That's not a commentary on World War I. I'm sure Tolkien's life experience through World War I informed the telling of this tale. Because it's sad. It's sad. And war is hell. Alright, 4 more pages. 4 more pages. Then the fame of the fights on the far marches were carried to the court of the king of Doriath, and tales of Turin were told in his halls, and how Beleg the Ageless was brother-in-arms to the black-haired boy from the beaten people. Black-haired boy from the beaten people. Then the king called them to come before him ever and anon when the orc raids waned, to rest them and revel, and to raise awhile the secret songs of the sons of Ing. I forget who specifically Ing is referring to. It might be reference to Ingwe, who is the eldest elf on record, if that makes sense. He's still several generations into the elves, but he's the eldest elf that's ever spoken of in the Silmarillion. Okay, where was I? There it is. On a time was Turin at the table of Thingol. There was laughter long and the loud clamor of a countless company that quaffed the mead. Quaffed the mead? Amid the wine of Dorwinion that went ungrudged in their golden goblets, and goodly meats there burdened the boards, 'neath the blazing torches set high in those halls that were hewn of stone. Their mirth fell on many, their minstrels clear did sing to them songs of the city of Tun, 'neath Tyne Gwethiel, towering mountain, where the great gods sit and gaze on the world from the guarded shores of the Gulf of Faery. Then one sang of the slaying of the swan ship's haven and the curse that had come on the kindred sense. All silent sat and soundless hearkened, and waited the words save one alone, the man among elves that Morwen bore. Unheeding he heard, or high feasting, or lay or laughter, and looked, it seemed, to keep distance in the dark without, and strained for sounds in the still spaces, for voices that vanished in the veils of night. He was lithe and lean, and his locks were wild, and woodland weeds he wore of brown and grey and green, and gay jewel or gold trinket his garb knew not. So there's no ornament on his clothing. An elf there was, Orgoth, of the ancient race that was lost in the lands where the long marches from the quiet waters of Cuiviénen were made in the murk of the mid-world's gloom, ere light was lifted aloft o'er earth. But blood of the gnomes was blent in his veins, and he was close akin to the king of Doriath, a hardy hunter, and his heart was brave, but loose his laughter and light his tongue, and his pride outran his prowess in arms. He's a haughty, arrogant son of a bitch. He was fain before all of fine raiment, and of gems and jewels, and jealous of such as found favor before himself. Now costly clad in colors gleaming, he sat on a seat that was set on high near the king and queen, and close to Turin. When those twain were at table, he had taunted him oft, lightly with laughter, for his loveless ways, his haggard raiment, and his hair unshorn. But Turin, untroubled, neither turned his head nor wasted words on the wit of Orgoth. But this day of the feast, more deep his gloom than of wont, and his words men won harder. For of 12 long years the table was full, since on Morwen his mother, through a maze of tears, he looked the last, and the long shadows of the forest had fallen on his fading home, and he answered few, and Orgoth not. So he's thinking about his family, and how he hasn't seen his mother for 12 years at this point. So we can assume he's, I want to say 17, perhaps? Maybe 18? Because, how old was he when he got there? He was still a kid, so I want to say that he's still a teenager here. So people are talking all around him. He's not answering many of them, and he's not answering Orgoth at all. He's ignoring the guy. As he should. Then the fool's mirth was filled the more, to a keener edge was his carping whetted at the clothes uncouth and the uncombed hair of Turin new come from the tangled forest. He drew forth daintily a dear treasure, a comb of gold that he kept about him, and tendered it to Turin. But he turned not his eyes, nor deigned to heed or hearken to Orgoth, who too deep drunken that disdain should quell him. Okay, this is Orgoth speaking. Took me a second there. Nay, and thou knowest not thy need of comb, nor its use, quoth he. Too young thou left'st thy mother's ministry, and 'twere meet to go, that she teach thee tame thy tangled locks. Of the women of Heathlum be not wild and loveless, uncouth and unkempt as their cast-off sons. What are you doing, Orgoth? No. We can imagine that's not going to go over well. Saying you were too soon taken from your mother to learn proper hygiene. What an asshole. Like, you can tease to a point, but damn, man, like, let it go. So here we're about to get Turin's response. Then a fierce fury like a fire blazing was born of bitterness in his bruised heart. His white wrath woke at the words of scorn for the women of Heathlum washed in tears, and a heavy horn to his hand lying, with gold adorned for good drinking, of his might, unmindful, thus moved in ire, he seized and swinging, swiftly flung it in the face of Orgoth.
Thou fool,
he said.
Fill thy mouth therewith, and to me no further thus witless prate by wine bemused.
But his face was broken, and he fell backward, and heavy his head there hit upon the stone of the floor rock-paved mid flagons and vessels of the o'erturned table, that tumbled on him as clutching he fell, and carped no more in death silent. There dumb were all at bench and board, in blank amaze they rose round him, and with ruth of heart he gazed aghast on his grievous deed, on his wine-stained hand, with wandering eyes half comprehending. On his heel then he turned into the night striding, and none stayed him, but some their swords half slipped from sheaths. They were Orgoth's kin. Yet for awe of Thingol they dared not draw, while the dazed king stone-faced stared on his stricken thane, and no sign showed them. But the slayer weary his hands laved in this hidden stream that strikes for the gates, nor stayed his tears.
Who has cast,
he cried,
a curse upon me? For all I do is ill, and an outlaw now in bitter banishment and blood guilty. Of my foster father I must flee the halls, nor look on the lady beloved again.
Yea, his heart to Heathlam had hastened him now, but that road he dared not, lest wrath he draw out of the elves after him, and their anger alight should speed the spears in despite of Morgoth, o'er the hills of Heathlam to hunt him down, lest a doom more dire than they dreed of old be meted his mother and the Maid of Tears. So he dearly wants to return to Heathlam, but he's afraid that if he goes there, the elves will attack his mother and sister. In the furthest folds of the forest of Doriath, in the darkest dales on its drear borders, in haste he hid him, lest the hunt take him. And they found not his footsteps who fared after, the thanes of Thingol, who 30 days sought him sorrowing, and searched in vain with no purpose of ill, but the pardon bearing of Thingol's throne in 1,000 caves. He in council constrained the kin of Orgoth, to forget their grief and forgiveness show. In that willful bitterness had barbed the words of Orgoth the elf. Who is speaking here? I think it's Thingol. Okay.
His hour had come, that his soul should seek the sad pathway to the deep valley of the dead awaiting, there 1,000 years thrice to ponder in the gloom of Gurthrond his grim jesting, ere he fare to ferry to feast again.
Yet of his own treasure he opened the gates, and gifts ungrudging of gold and gems to the sons he gave of the slain, and his folk well deemed the deed. But that doom of the king Turin knew not, and turned against him the hands of the elves he unhappy believed, wandering the woodland woeful-hearted. For his fate would not that the folk of the caves should harbor longer Hurin's offspring. And thus ends part 1. So Thingol had pardoned him and had, placated the family of Orgoth here. I think he's called Siren. Or Sylbeth, maybe? No, not Sylveth. That's Lord of the Rings. It's something Syl related. Sauron. He's called Sauron in the Silmarillion, but here he's Orgoth. I think Sauron is better. So that's the difference between the Lays of Beleriand version. Is here he's just talking out his ass, and Turin takes, a cup from the table that's bejeweled and stuff, and he just whacks him. Hits him super hard out of anger, lashing out at him, and as he falls backward, his head happens to hit a stone and he dies. In the Silmarillion version, it's a bit darker because Turin actively pursues this guy, like he hunts him down. Sauron has been giving him grief for a long while, and he hunts Sauron down. And is actively trying to torment him in return. And Sauron being like, dude, like, I was just joking. He freaks out and he's like literally terrified. He's scared for his life. And he's, at that point, Turin has like taken his clothes, so he's running naked through the woods, and he believes that Turin is pursuing him to kill him. So he comes up to a bit of a cliff over one of the rivers in Doriath, and he tries to jump the length of it and doesn't make it, and so he falls and dies on the rocks of the river. So that, I think Tolkien darkened it on purpose to make it more believable that Turin's like, I did a bad and I will never be forgiven for this. Versus, I mean, obviously here, you hit the guy, but you had no control over him falling backward and hitting his head on a rock and dying from it. Normally a blow wouldn't kill an elf like that. But, him being the unlucky gent he is, that's what happens in this version. So I think it's in our heads, we're just kind of like, dude, like, it was an accident. The elves aren't stupid. They're going to at least acknowledge that this was an accident and this guy should not have been talking that way, that he deserved to get punched, and it was bad luck that he fell as he did and perished. So I think that, yeah, I agree. The change was needed. I think it was needed to darken the story and make it a little more ambiguous as to how Thingol would react. Because when you're actively pursuing someone and scaring the living crap out of them, and they try to leap away from you in fear of their life and they die in the process, there's a bit more guilt there. A bit more guilt to be had. So the Silmarillion version is better in that respect, in my opinion. But it's really cool to see an older version, and especially in the poetic format. So there are like 20 pages of notes in between that and part 2. So we're going to skip the notes, and next time we will start on part 2, which is titled Beleg. So we'll be reading more about Beleg. How long is part 2? Part 2 is a fair amount. So everything that we read today was 560 lines. Part 2 goes until 1338. So it's going to be a little bit longer next time. But we'll sink into it and we'll just enjoy it. We'll take it as it comes. So I think we're just going to enjoy the poetry. We shall enjoy the poetry on Silmarillion Saturday. It's still a story from the Silmarillion, it's just not the actual Silm anymore. We're going to be covering the Lays of Beleriand. So we'll hit part 2 next weekend. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying the difference of the poetry, because the poetry is definitely a different beast with Tolkien. But I really love it. I love the way that he weaves the words, right? So these streams won't be as long. I know reading the Silm, we went for sometimes 3 hours. And perhaps we'll work ourselves back up to that, but I wanted to do something a little bit smaller and try it out, so we'll call that it for today. We'll do part 2 for sure next week, and I'll look ahead and see if part 3 is terribly long. If it's not too long, then we can try and do 2 and 3 in one. Nice! Tolkien actually inspired you to keep reading poetry. That's super cool. I'm not very well read. In general, I'm not very well read. This is a thing I am happy to admit about myself. It is a shortcoming of mine. I don't read enough at all. I've read Tolkien, and I've read some Mercedes Lackey, some Laurel K. Hamilton, though I freaking hate her stuff. I rage read those books. I rage read Anita Blake and Mary Gentry. Those books are terrible. And just it's such queer baiting. It makes me so angry. I've read some Anne Bishop. These are all fantasy and urban fantasy. But that's about it. Like, I really haven't read that much. I did read Harry Potter once all the way through. Only once, though. And now I don't even own them anymore. I have thrown them away. / donated them. I forget which one I did. If I had been in more of a tiff when I got rid of those books, I would have destroyed them. I'd have burned them or something. Haven't read any Patricia Briggs, no. I don't even know who that is. Like, my hyper-focus has kept me very strictly on Tolkien. Oh, man. I've been so devoted to Tolkien stuff for such a long period of time that it's sad that I haven't tried any other major authors in the genre. There are several books on my to-read list, especially by authors of color, because I love other people's take on fantasy, right? And I like fantasy or science fiction that brings in a lot of multicultural elements. I just finished reading, this is actually a big